Hello.
Hello. Let's see
Better?
if it starts doing it again. Yeah, I can't hear myself going over and over again, which is
Oh,
great.
brilliant. Okay, cool. Anyway, yeah, sorry for anyone that was watching. Just a small blip of technical difficulties. But yeah, so shall we crack on with the questions then? It's
Yeah,
35,
absolutely.
12:35. So yeah, thank you for everyone that dropped questions in the question box. And if you've got any questions as we go along for Mark, just drop them in the comments on this live video. We're here for the whole hour. So yeah, I'll start with the first one, shall I?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one that came in was, what are the best books to read about startup products?
Yeah, really good question. I think from my perspective, it's more about what were the best books for me. What are the things that worked for me as far as product management in startups? I think at Nova, one of our sort of leading lights as far as books are concerned, and our Bible that we go back to is Outreach's Lean Startup. Um, I'd say that anybody that's looking to go into product development and with startups should read that as a must. I think it's certainly the most important book that I go back to again and again. Another one, obviously, we work very closely with Ash Moyer, so with the Running Lean and his newest book, Scaling Lean. So what that does is it gives you a bit more strategies on how to achieve product and market fit. So they're really excellent. And then personally, I've been reading a lot about user experience recently. So I've been reading a fantastic book called Don't Make Me Think, which is about sort of having common sense in your user experience on the web pages and within mobile apps and things like that. So I guess it depends on what you're looking for and what you're looking to learn. But I would say that they're really, really strong recommendations to start looking at if you want to go into developing a startup product.
Cool. And I'm always put off, like, I'm not a big reader, but I will read if it's like necessary.
Mhm.
So like, how big are these books? Are we talking like Bibles or?
They're all quite short, but yeah, we've got a couple of people that sort of consume literature in different ways across our team. They are available on Audible, the majority of them. So yeah, you can go and have a listen to them. I think Eric Ries actually reads his book, which is great. Um, the so there's that way of consuming it, but they are quite short as well, and they're always with practical examples and things that have worked in the market and things like that. I think are really important. I think with the lean startup, it's certainly something that will, I'm sure, as we go through other questions, that I'll reference as far as sort of build, measure, learn loops and feedback loops that we work with customers in order to navigate our product development roadmap. We'll talk about that quite a lot, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well,
I'd,
I'll move
I'd
on.
also recommend a couple of podcasts. Just go and have a look at. There's tons of product development and startup podcasts out there. I love Deliver It, which is much more sort of product ownership. But again, I'm sure we can put links to these things in the Facebook group for people to go and have a look at.
Got there before I did. I was about to say we'll drop everything that Mark's mentioned in like a post after with all the links and stuff, so everyone can get them. Yeah, I'm much more of like a podcast person. I like to sort of listen to things as I like jot away and do work anyway. So that's good. Yeah. So the next question is with I think this one was from Paul. So this one's, with a first round investment, is there any advice or rules of thumb as to how much of that you should attribute to product development services versus marketing and other business functions?
I guess that's a really, really good question. I think the very simple answer is it depends on what you're looking to learn. So are you trying to learn a lot more about the problem area? Are you trying to learn more about your proposed solution? All of those different things. So I guess first of all, looking at what the problem you're looking to solve, I think you want to get to know your customers. So one of the things that we really push people to start doing at the very early stage is talking to the customers. Now you can do that via a number of means. One of which is marketing and starting to get customers to come and speak to you, sign up to links, get a web page out there that you can start using to have those conversations. But I would say it's very important to start having those conversations as much as possible to understand their problem and how the big important question, which is how are they solving that problem currently? Because there's two answers to that. Firstly, they'll give you an answer of, okay, well, I use paper to write it down, or I have a jot book that I always have in my pocket. Or you may have another answer, which is, oh, well, I don't solve it. And the question then is, well, is that because it doesn't need to be solved? So to engage with those people, often marketing is a good approach to that. We always encourage face-to-face interviews. Now that's changed a lot in the last 6-7 months. So
Yeah.
obviously Zoom calls or Google Hangouts and Google Chats and stuff like that are the way forward at the moment, which does actually allow you to reach a wider group, and people are much more comfortable with coming on to Zoom calls and things than they were previously, which I think is an advantage to us. Going back to sort of the crux of the question, as you say, with marketing and with developing a product or developing a prototype, I think there are loads of good examples of how you can use each of these elements. I think you should always look at the one that's going to add the most value. You'll know about the sort of video MVP that Dropbox deployed. So what they did was they wanted to understand how would people be more interested in an easier way to upload files and keep files. And so they, rather than creating it, they did a video and put that video online with a link to signups. And they went from around 5,000 signups to 75,000 signups. The really interesting bit of that was they hadn't actually built anything. They just did a marketing video showing of how they felt it would work to see if they could gauge interest. So that worked really well for them. But then there are other examples where it's like, actually, it's more important to build it and get something out there and see what the interaction with that is. And again, there's loads of different approaches to how you then go and test that. I think it's important to set your hypothesis of what you're looking to learn, and then start working towards how you're going to test that in a very scientific and methodical way.
Yeah, I guess as well, like, for example, flip it on the other side. So working in the marketing team at Nova, we're always trying to like push people to like, I think people are very sort of inclined to work more on the product development side of things. And sometimes like, instead of it being like a 50-50 split, it's sort of attributed maybe like 70-30 sometimes. I think the two sort of play a good part together, don't you? So what do you think
Definitely.
about that? Do you think it's sort of like case by case scenario, or?
I think it's people always have their perspective and they always have their biases because of that. And if you come from a development world, you may say, okay, well, we should build something first. And from a marketing world, you're going to say, okay, well, actually, we could test it easily with marketing. I think that's why it's so important to have cross-functional teams, and it's a big advantage of working at Nova that I've felt in that you can go into a meeting room, whether that's virtual or in an office, and you can get a marketeer, get a designer, get an engineer, and get a product manager into that room and start to talk about, okay, well, what are the different approaches? What, first of all, is our hypothesis? So what is the problem that we've got and our potential solutions? And then you can start to look at, okay, well, what are the best ways for us to start testing that and actually have something that we can measure in order to iterate and build going forward. And I think, so the answer is have those discussions and be collaborative in those discussions in the same way that you would in any sort of Scrum meeting. And then take that forward to then see how you can test it. And sometimes it could be both. Sometimes you could say, okay, let's do both.
That's a very diplomatic answer, speaking to a marketer. No, but thanks, guys, as well for the likes. I hope you're enjoying the content anyway. So we'll move on to question 3 now. The next 4 questions are sort of clumped together and they're sort of very similar, but they follow like a nice pattern. So the first one would be, when is the right time to build?
It's a really, really good question. I think it's similar to the last answer to an extent, in that the right time to build is when you reach a point when you need to. So we follow at Nova, we follow very lean methodology. So you want to be able to build the right thing. So build the right thing can mean a number of things. It could be build the right thing to test your problem. It could be build the right thing to test your solution. So I guess the time is right when you know that you can learn something either way at the end of it. So if you've done all of your user interviews and you've developed an idea of backlog of the riskiest assumptions of what you've been working on, you want to go and say, okay, I'm testing what are our riskiest assumptions. At that point, you should be building something to say, okay, this is what my experiment is going to be, and this is how I'm going to test that approach. I don't know whether that answers the question to an extent.
Yeah, I think it does. Sorry, I'm just trying to reply to Zach. Zach, I've seen your message in the comments. I'll send you my email address, Nova's email address. If you just want to pop me your query via that way, I'll direct you to the right person in the department, and they'll hopefully be able to solve that for you. So I'll just pop you in my email quickly. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, no, I'll go back to that question whilst you're doing that. I think
Yeah, go on.
that's why we always look at sort of that minimal viable product, and the minimal viable product is something that adds value to to a solution for the problem that people are experiencing, something that adds value to that end customer. So really assess what is minimal. One of the things that I know that's held us back sometimes with both from a product management perspective and from engineering perspective and from our founders is that sometimes you worry that it's not good enough and that it doesn't look right, or I'm going to scare off my customers, or I'm going to I'm going to ruin my brand in the market by putting something out there. Everything that I read says you should be uncomfortable and you should be embarrassed by the minimal viable product that you put out there. And I think certainly from my perspective, and I'd say from our founders and from everyone, we need to be braver with that, and we need to push that. We need to push that and say, okay, if we're embarrassed by it, great, but as long as it tests and gives us some value on the back of that.
Yeah, I think it's because as well people are so precious about it, about their startups, and it's understandable. Like I feel like it's sort of an extension of them, isn't it? They're very sort of like proud of it. But like you said, sometimes you learn from your failures, and you've just got to take those risks and be a little bit embarrassed about the products at times.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I'll move on to the next question. When building your MVP, how do you decide which features to focus on first? I know this is quite a tricky one.
It's a really good one because it depends on what stage you're at. The way that we work in different fits. As far as are we looking for a problem fit? Are we trying to understand that problem more? Are we looking for solution fit, which is we know what the problem is, but have we got a solution that solves that problem?
Yeah.
And they're the sort of two earliest stages that we work on. I think in the early stage before you've built anything, I really, really believe in the sort of the build, measure, learn loops. And first of all, you've got to have something that you can measure. So it's about having your interviews, speaking to your early adopters and talking to people that have that problem and how they're solving it now and what they think about your suggested solutions, and then starting to develop that and finding trends amongst your group. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be thousands of people. It can be as small as 5 different groups that all agree that, do you know what, that would add value to my life. And then you'll be able to sort of work through that and start putting that into your MVP requirements. At later stages and how you iterate upon that MVP, I'd hope that your sort of measure elements of the build, measure, learn loop becomes more sophisticated. So again, you should be continuing to get customer feedback, speak to your customers as much as you can, but you should also have analytics that you can use. So you might have Google Analytics that you put in place, or on a mobile app you might be using Amplitude or Hotjar, which are all different analytic tools that tell you about how people are using your product. And that's the big advantage of, I guess, getting that the MVP in place and getting the product in place, because you get to add to your customer interviews real data that you can start working with as well.
Yeah, that's really sound advice, that. Have I asked you this question? No, I haven't asked you this question. Sorry, I'm losing track of the questions.
Okay.
Sorry. I was getting so engrossed in your last answer, I just lost track of questions. So number 5. So how do you know what to build next? So once you've decided, like, what features to focus on first, maybe they've gone really well, and then you find you need to build something. Maybe you need to build something next. So how do you decide what that is?
Yeah, really good question again. And they're always going to be similar answers, but I guess they change dependent on where you're at with your product. So with all of the products that I work on, they've been I've probably been working on them for a year and a half, nearly 2 years. And a lot of those will develop a large backlog as you're working through. So backlog from a product management perspective is something that we've started to scope as far as what our solutions may be, and we've added those to a list of different requirements that we're working through. And we keep that in Nova Sense, we keep that in Jira, where we use that as a communication tool that we will use and discuss our stories in Scrum. So we'll have a product backlog for all of our existing products. And I guess the question about what do you build next is dependent on the prioritized list that you have in your backlog.
Yeah.
So how do you prioritize that? Again, there's a number of different approaches and a number of different things that you have to look at as a product manager. The first and the purest sense is what's going to add the most value, which you determine through your data and the measurements that you have previously. But actually, it can be a lot more complicated than that. And sometimes you have to be a bit nuanced in how you look at your backlog, because it could be that, well, what's the most important thing for our investors at the moment? Yes, what's the most important things for our customers? What's the most important thing for our first customer that we're working with closely, and who may pay for it straight away, and then we can come back and prioritize it in that more purist sense. I think you have to be strict and disciplined with your backlog, and try and push the things that are where you're looking to learn. But you also do have to be pragmatic with a backlog as well, and say, oh, actually, the thing that I need to learn at this point is, can I get further investment? And this ticks that box in order to get that further investment. As long as you're aware of that's the reason you're making the decision, and that's why you're working through it.
Yeah, I think as long as it's sort of making progress in some way, isn't it? It's whether it's for your customers or, like you said, sometimes it's for the investors, not always, but there are occasions. But as long as it's going in the right direction, I guess.
Absolutely, and when from a product sense in the development area, when we look to prioritize that backlog, we'll sort of group things and look for a goal that we're going to work towards in that sprint, and that goal's not going to be add a button or add this feature. It's going to be sort of focused on allow that user to be able to do this, or allow that user to have a better day, and that will be our goal. So everything that we work on will work towards that.
Yeah, and that's I guess where it sort of like ties in with marketing as well, isn't it? Because you're focusing on the customer's need, not just like you said, add a button for the sake of it. Yeah. So also, guys, if anyone's got any questions as we go along, just pop them in the comments. I'm moderating them, so we'll get Mark to answer them later on. But yeah, maybe we can do like a battle of the best question. But so yeah, number 6. So how fast should you move through each product iteration? And in your opinion, is there such thing as moving too fast? So this was actually my question. So I'm
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think. The answer is, for me, there's too fast as far as moving through and getting different iterations through. The reason that something could be too fast is because you're not looking to learn, and therefore you're guessing at what your next feature should be, instead of actually establishing that feature is actually going to add value, or that improvement is going to add value to your customers. So that's the danger of moving too fast. Now, you should always be considering that. So actually, this should be part of your process. So therefore, really, you should always be looking to iterate quickly and work through and shorten our feedback loops and get things out to our customers. So whilst you can move too fast as far as if you don't start doing your analysis properly and properly establishing your backlog, but if you have a truly established backlog, then no, there's no such thing as moving too fast in that sense. In that, if you're stepping through the processes in the correct way, you should do that as quickly as possible. But sometimes there will be times when you probably want to put it out there to learn a bit more. So you might put a new feature in, and it takes time to get to those customers. As far as I don't know, maybe your founder or maybe someone or the marketeers that are trying to promote it want to engage a certain number of people to sort of get the right type of data, then that may slow you down. But you still should be trying to move through those as quickly as possible.
I'm just going to slip something in quickly before I ask the next question. So when you refer to like a backlog, are these already like established sort of product amendments or product development features that you've recognized, or is it a case of once you've discovered a finding, is your backlog sort of developed from like your findings, or is it before you go into product development, do you have a sort of established idea of roughly what you'll be doing?
It's all of the above.
Okay.
You can't, yeah, because you can't be precious about your backlog. So there's a number of different types of things that could come into your backlog. It could be some technical debt that you've built up as you're working through. Now at Nova, again, we try to sort of manage our technical debt with every build. So we'll look and we'll try to improve. So every bit of code that we go into, for example, we'll try and improve that part of the product. And on top of that, you may have maybe a feature request that the founder's been, well, a key stakeholder's been really interested in for a long time because they feel that that will add loads of value. And you might be looking to establish that. So you might say, okay, I'm going to keep it in the backlog, but we're waiting for evidence from our users for that. So it'll be made up of all these different things. But when I say you shouldn't be precious with your backlog either, because there may be something that you learn in the following the latest iteration that trumps everything, and it's like, no, this is the route that we're going to go down. I think it's really important to sort of do that and keep analysing and working through that. We use and work through our backlog as a team, as a cross-functional team, and that should be from marketing, from engineers, from design, and from our product management team and our founder.
Okay, so it's more like a skeleton of the like how you're going to work, and it's just you just adapt it as you go along.
Yeah, it's a build-up of work that you're trying to qualify and validate to say, okay, well, this is the most important thing we do next.
Okay, cool. That's a nice little summary of it. So I'll just ask the question that Zach's just put in the chat just before we move on to the next one. So sorry, I'm sort of squinting to see it because my phone's all the way over here.
Okay.
So innovation is constantly changing. How do you manage risks of another competitor coming up with a better solution that can dilute your product?
It's a really good question. So there's a couple of things to sort of unpick there, I guess. Yes, everything's always innovations, and the world and the markets are changing a lot. I think we've seen that more evidence of that in this year than any other. We've obviously, if you look at all like Zoom or Google and how they're adapting to people home working and working through the I guess how video calls and things like that have changed. I think you'll see how innovation is sort of driving each other. As far as diluting the problem that you're looking at, I guess it depends on the problem. There's always going to be more than one solution for different problems and how you're going to work. We, from a working at that.
Right, am I back? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Okay. Well, my Wi-Fi's just flipped out, but I hope you answered that. I sort of got halfway and it cut off, so we'll continue as it is. My screen. Oh, hold on. Sorry, guys, just having some Wi-Fi issues. Let's see if this works again. Here we go. Right. While we're just waiting for Mark to join, if anyone's got any more questions, I see Mark's put one there as well. Just add them to the chat and we'll get him to answer them. Right, okay. Here we go. Hello.
Hey, I should be back. I've moved off Wi-Fi. I'm on 4G now, so we'll see if that
was
helps.
it you?
I think it could have been me.
Either way, yeah.
I know Sky Internet are having issues in my area, so I don't know whether that's part of the problem.
See, I'm no better. I've got Now TV, and I think it works on about like 2 megabytes. So we'll see how this goes. It's fine. If all else fails, we'll go to 4G.
I think we were on Zach's question. I don't know where we got up to on that though. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, Zach. If there was a issue with the connection, do you just want to pop it in the comments, and I'll get Mark to re-answer them again, or if you've got all the information you've got.
I think I can summarise if that helps. So yeah. In summary, it's important to keep an eye on competitors. It's also important not to be distracted by that if you're working with customers and you're getting that great feedback and believing in your process, that you understanding the value that you can provide to customers will allow you to get ahead in that market. But keep an eye on the competitors and see what's happening with them. And manage that as you go along, and just keep understanding, are you still solving that problem? And it could mean that you pivot slightly on the solution that you're working on. It could be that you end up focusing on a particular type of cohort of customer. It's all part of the data that you should be gathering to measure the success of your product and startup.
Fab. Well, I hope that answered your question, Zach. I'm sorry if you're still having problems with connection. This will be posted in the group after anyway, so the connection seems fine from my end at the moment. But yeah, if there's an issue at all, it'll be posted in the group afterwards. So the questions Mark answers will be there. I'll just ask Mark's question, another Mark, just while we're going through these ones, just so we don't lose track of them. So he said, can you give a good example of where a startup you have worked on has given users a really basic WAS trial, right through to a fully functioning MVP or final product, and the value added at the user at each stage?
So a really good Wizard of Oz trial, and where that's added value.
I thought it was Wizard of Oz. I didn't know, just in case. I thought it was.
Yeah, so we've probably got a number of examples of that, and I'm trying to think if whether I'd be removing some of the magic of that, looking behind the curtain as far as how those technically set up. I think originally, for example, on one of our startups called Passmates, not one that I've worked on directly, but one of my team have worked on. Originally, Passmate was, the objective is to match learners with the right type of instructor, and now we've developed a very sort of unique code in order to match and make sure that we get the right types of learners with those customers, so that they feel supported, the right level of patience between the instructor and things like that. And that's taken a while to sort of develop that code, but to begin with, it was a lot of in the background doing interviews. So our founders were actually doing interviews with the learners, but then doing interviews with the instructors, and making that match manually through a lot of work of understanding the type of people that they were. But at the time, we were saying that it was our unique matching functionality. But what that did was it allowed us to gather that data to then develop the algorithm that is now in place on that application.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the Wizard of Oz trials. Like, I always think they're the exciting ones to work on anyway. So yeah, I'll go back to the questions that came in before the live as well now. And again, guys, if anyone's got any questions, just drop them in the comments. If anyone's just joined. So The next question, as a founder of an app, you can get lost in a mountain of user feedback. From your experience, what's your top tip for finding the most important problem and prioritizing your development roadmap based on this?
Yeah, it's a big problem. So I didn't work in startups originally. I worked on at an HR company, and we created HR software and solutions. And it was a massive challenge there, in that we had multiple stakeholders, so senior people in the business or senior clients that we were working with, and we were often sort of led by who had the biggest voice rather than what was the most important thing to do for the users. Um, and that was a big challenge when we worked in that company. And I think the refreshing thing at Nova and the approach that we take now is actually being able to focus on our users. And so, to answer the question, it is about understanding what's going to add the most value to the customer again. And I am going to keep repeating that, and I know I'm repeating that element, but it's so important. So
Need to get the point across.
yeah, and the simple answer is, what in your backlog is going to add the most value to that customer. So, and in supporting them in solving that problem. So to determine that, it is about going through your measurements, working through, okay, what's our user feedback? What are the analytics showing us, and where can we take the value? But there's also other things that you should measure as part of that, which is, how easy is it to deploy this? So it might be that the most important thing is that we install video chat into our application, but that's actually a larger build that's going to be costly. Whereas we've got something that's second most important that actually takes 5 minutes to do, and therefore you put that to your top of your backlog as how you're going to work on it. So there's a number of different things that you should do in order to measure how you're going to work on it. And then it's about prioritizing that as part of your list.
Okay, cool. Anyway, we've just got another question that's coming from Sulfur. So I'll just get you to answer that one quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to our last pre-live questions anyway.
Okay.
So how do we avoid snake bite tail situations in our product development, and how do we assist users to see value in our innovation? You can take a second to think about it.
Yeah. So can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, go on. So it says, how do we avoid snake bite tail situation in our product development, and how do we assist users to see value in our innovation?
Well, there's a couple of bits in that. I think I'll start with the second part, which is, how do we assist users to see value in our innovation? I think there's almost a danger in the question there that I'd sort of highlight to begin with, which is, well, why are we having to assist them in that value? Now, how do we illustrate the value to them? How do we lead them to that value?
Yeah.
I think there's a number of different ways of working through that. I think the first part is, I guess, it's the different experiments. It's setting a hypothesis of what value you add. So I would say, almost like, go and look up sort of traditional experiment setup and go and write a very traditional standard hypothesis of, this is what value we feel if we add this feature, or if we put this application into the market, this is the value that we feel that we can add. And then write what would be the type of evidence that you'd expect to see because of that.
Okay.
I would say that that's a really important and strict way to do it, and also have a plan for what happens if they don't see that value. Often, what we'll do in a product sense is, if you're not very strict with yourself in how you write the hypothesis and what you have as qualified or validated evidence, often what you'll end up doing is start excusing it afterwards, and you'll say, oh, well, we didn't reach enough people, or we didn't get the marketing absolutely right, or we didn't build the right feature, or technically it was slower than we thought it was going to be, or the build took too long. And you'll start to make all these excuses, and you won't actually look at the crux of your question of, actually, did we get those people to sign up? Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do a retrospective and not start to understand, okay, well, why didn't it work? but you should always be very strict and say, okay, well, if we do this, what are our expectations if we're correct with this? I'd say that's probably, I think that answers the snake bite part of the question as well, but I hadn't heard that phrase before, if I'm honest. If someone can give a bit more detail on that, that'd be great.
Yeah. If Zolfa, if Mark hasn't answered that part of your question, just explain the snake bite tail bit, because we'll be interested to know as well. And yeah, if anyone, again, I've said it a million times, but if anyone's got any questions, just drop them in the comments if you're new to the live. Yeah, so the last of our pre-live questions that came in. So from your experience, what would be the average initial startup cost for product development?
Really good question. I think my sort of flinch reaction is it's a lot more expensive when you get it wrong. So if you build something that no one wants, that's the most expensive thing that you can do. And so going back to our points, read the Lean Startup, understand your build, measure, learn loops, understand that everything is a grand experiment, that there are different types of MVPs that you can work through, the different engines of growth, and whether you should be pivoting or persevering with different elements. Get through and work through what Eric Ries is telling you on that. So that would be my first point. I think, I'm trying to think, on average, software development isn't cheap. The talented people that I work with at Nova, it is an expensive thing to work on. So try and be as lean as possible. Try and learn as much as you can, so that when you're building, you're not just, you should always continue to navigate your roadmap, but you should have a good idea of what you're going to be working through and what sort of gatekeeping you're going to do with your hypotheses and your experiments that you're going to work through. You should, but you can do that. There's loads of cheap ways to do that first, so that you don't, when you get to the expensive part, you don't make mistakes. And those cheap things are having as many conversations as possible. Going and maybe throwing up a marketing site that you can start sharing on Facebook and on WhatsApp and on Instagram, and all of these different elements that you can start to reach out to people with to start testing the elements. And I think that's the basis of my advice, is that it is expensive when you start building, because software development is an expensive thing to do. But it's a lot less expensive if you qualify your roadmap as much as possible, and you can do that cheaply. Well, cheaply in terms of cost, but it's very expensive in terms of effort, and you've got to put everything into it.
And I guess hardware products, can you expect them to be like even more sort of, like, how do they begin at the probably at the beginning of the journey?
Yeah, I guess it's something that we haven't touched upon as much in this, and that's probably because I come from a software background. Now, the team that I work with also have hardware products as well, as you know, Megan, but maybe not all our live listeners know. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting is that Lean as a methodology comes from lean manufacturing and hardware products. And therefore, actually, when we start, how we work at Nova, we're putting some of the principles that we learned from lean software elements back into our hardware piece. And again, it's about, okay, well, what can we test now and what can we work on now? Again, it will be expensive. You need a lot of talent, but you can prototype and you can start testing elements of it. And it's picking off each of those elements and saying, okay, well, what can I test now? Firstly, is it something that someone has to wear? If it's something that, well, why don't we get something that they can wear now that see if it's comfortable? And we can learn that really quickly. Does it need a big, massive battery? Okay, well, it probably will need this size battery. Okay, well, let's just print something off that's that size and put it in the thing that they need to wear and see if they're comfortable wearing it. There's loads of things that you can use, sort of those experiments to say, okay, well, I've qualified that actually this is really comfortable and they can wear that and they can sleep with that on. You can establish that early. There's the more technical elements, and obviously the as far as the classification elements and making sure that it's health and safety safe, those things are going to take some more time, but there are things that you can test and start to qualify as you work through.
Yeah, and you know what? There's also on our blog, there's a really good blog from our lead product manager in the hardware department, Graham Cook, and he talks about building lean hardware startups. So I'll include that in the links that of the books and the podcast that we mentioned at the beginning. So if anyone's interested, they can take a look at that.
Yeah.
And we've got another question from Zach. So let me just read this through so I can say it properly this time. Hold on. Okay, so what are some of the challenges you have had in product development? Sorry, my glasses obviously don't work, do they? What are some of the challenges have you had in product development? Ever had challenges in artwork and novelty? If so, did you mitigate these areas? How did you mitigate these areas? Sorry.
Um, yeah, I've had all the every sort of challenge that you think you're going to come up against, you will as part of your product journey. Um, So whether that's a problem with how we've deployed some designs or the user experience, or whether it's a technical issue or elements like that, we've had all of those different challenges and working through it, and that's why it's important to get to users quickly to understand. Okay, well, what is has it hit the right notes? Is it working in the right way? I think. Let me pick out some examples. So, big challenge in it may be user experience. Are our users going to understand how to use our application? And I think I referenced earlier that I'm reading. Well, I've actually just finished a brilliant book called "Don't Make Me Think," and the sort of primary principle of "Don't Make Me Think" is when I look at an application, do I have to think what I need to click to do to take the action that I need to? So when I look at Google Chat, do I know where to write my message? Or do I have to think, is that where I write my message? I'll have a go. And it's about how every time you're having to ask yourself a question of, is that the right place to click? How that starts to build up and actually takes away from your experience of working through the application. I'd say that in the past, probably not at Nova so much, but in the past, in my sort of long software development history, I think it's something that I wasn't very good at. And in previous teams that I worked in, we didn't have UX designers or designers as part of our team. And so therefore we didn't have that sort of cross-functional element, which meant that probably I was leading out on things that I wasn't as good at that time. Hopefully I've got a little bit better, but there were things where I'd make a user journey too complicated or elements like that. The difficulty is, Zach, is that you learn the hard way. So you'll be sat in front of, you'll either be as part of your sprint review or you'll be in front of some senior stakeholders, and you'll start clicking through an element and hear yourself explaining it as you're working through, and that's a bit embarrassing because you're like, okay, well, I've not got this right at all. And I'd say that can bring up a number of challenges. Another big challenge of working in software development is obviously estimating times and actually delivering elements on time and making sure that you're getting any release to the customer as soon as possible. That's something that I certainly work on really closely with the team. I think as far as solving any problem in product development, the thing that I deeply believe in is that it's about communication, and having really effective conversations with your teams. Communication from a product management perspective is often making sure that stakeholders understand what each of them mean, whether that's your users, whether that's your design team, whether that's your engineering, and all of those different elements. So when an engineer is having to translate something that I've said into code, what has been lost in translation, or have I explained myself well enough, or have I been too biased in how I've explained something? And the way to resolve that is just to keep that conversation open and keep talking and making sure that you go through your ceremonies as far as Scrum's concerned, and making sure that you've got a cross-functional collaborative environment where people feel that if they're not too sure about something, they can speak up. and that you're willing to evolve your user stories and your approach as you work through the different scenarios that something's going to work, that you're going to work on. So really important that on a startup that you have a fluid communication throughout, that certainly in our case where the founder completely understands that he or she has been heard, and that you're working as a team to pull in the right direction, which is usually driven by a goal that's been set at the beginning of a project.
Yeah, that's really good. So I hope that's answered your question, Zach. I've just seen on the Q&A that we posted on the group's page, there's just a question that's coming from Simon Collison. So I'll just read that one as well. So would you be able to provide some background on how your product team works with founders that join Nova? How is this relationship expected to develop so that we can benefit from all expertise available? That's a really good question.
That's a brilliant question. I guess going back to my earlier point, we need to work as a team. We need to work as a startup. I think what's really important when a founder comes on board is that they are usually our subject matter experts, our market experts. They know that area when they come and work with us. And the first conversation is about, well, what's the problem we're looking to solve, and what's our goal as a company? And it's really similar to sort of running employee engagement seminars or something like that. It's about bringing everyone on the journey and making sure that people are aligned to say, every time I go and work on something, I'm working to achieve that sort of overall goal. And there's a really good story that I always talk about with my teams, which is about when JFK first took a tour around NASA. And when he stopped and he asked a janitor what they were up to, whilst they were sort of walking through what's their job at NASA, and he said, well, my job at NASA is to put a man on the moon, because he understood that how him sweeping the floor or keeping everything tidy actually contributed to the astronauts' day, and therefore supported all the astronauts or the physicist or anyone that's working in that environment. He understood that if it wasn't clean, they may not be able to concentrate that day. So everything that he was doing was contributing to that end goal. And I think my first meeting with any founder is always about that. It's always about, okay, well, how do we get and bring our team alongside when we start to form our team about what we're trying to achieve as part of this startup? And the way that we work from then on is always about engagement. So we'll try and give as much access as possible to ensuring that people get to see these are the designs that we're going to be working on. You'll be part of any sort of design sprint that we'll be doing and working with our designers and with our engineers and our product managers about, and you'll be a voice in contributing to any elements like that, so that the founder is part of that team. After that, all of the different development stages will be working with you as a stakeholder and ensuring that you can see and understand how we're working, where we're up to, just as if you were in the same office, just as if you're in the same office and you were talking to us every day about how we're going to work. That's how we're going to move through it. I think there is an element that I do want to sort of draw out, which is the onus will be on you to go and bring value when you have those conversations. So when you're working with the team, make sure that you're representing the ideals, make sure that you're representing your users, and representing your users not just with the ideas that you've got about how you can solve that, which is great data, but be prepared to be challenged that, are you showing some solution bias there? But bringing with you evidence. So evidence-based decisions and saying, look, I've spoken to these 5 people and this is how they answered these questions. And we'll support you in all of that, in how you gather that information and how you gather evidence in order to make sure that we structure that roadmap. Because going back to an earlier point in this session, before probably one of our multiple breaks, building the wrong thing is very expensive, and we don't want to do that. We want to build the right things, and that's why we want to get to the users as soon as possible to test our assumptions.
Yeah, I think as well, we're going to challenge you, like as teams, like it's our job to sort of challenge you, but also challenge each other. And it's a lot easier to be challenged by one of your teammates than it is an investor. So we're just trying, I guess it's sort of like preparing them for that as well, really.
Definitely, and I think it's hard work. It is
Yeah.
hard work,
Yeah.
and there will be elements where you may feel that you have to have a really robust discussion between your different stakeholders. And I wouldn't apologize for that. Because what is key is we're going back that we've all got the same goal. And if someone's got a really strong opinion, it's with a reason. So let's discuss that and talk that through, and then find our way forward as far as how we're going to work. So the short answer to the really long-winded answer that I've just given is we work together collaboratively on every single element of how we're going to make this startup work, or how we're going to give this startup the best chance of working.
Yeah.
That's really important.
I feel like as well, it's the same for products, the same for every, marketing, every design, every department of in Nova as well. We truly do like work on each startup as if it's like the own Nova business.
Absolutely.
Like we're so like, hands on with things, and we want these startups to succeed. So we really do, work hell for leather for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I'm massively passionate about doing what's right. It's difficult to write a job description for anyone that works at Nova, because
Yeah.
sometimes where the most value is might be a little bit outside of your comfort zone. So on one of our, I don't think he'll mind, on one of our startups recently, which is PitchPath, which is an application that working with schools with special educational needs children to manage their expectations throughout the day. I ended up doing sales calls for them
Yeah.
in June sort of area, and that's definitely not one of my strengths. But it was what was needed at that time to sort of understand our product and our market better, and it was the thing that I could see would add the most value. So with it being a startup, be flexible and be ready to wear multiple hats. And as a going to go back to the sort of major theme of this, seek the value, go and find what's going to add evidence to what you want to build.
Well, you can add to your job description now, Mark, that you're a presenter. So
No.
yeah. Well, you know what? That's nearly about an hour. So we've got 4 minutes to go. So I guess from today's little drop-in session, so what would be maybe your top 5 tips or
Gosh.
advice? Maybe a nice summary for what we've discussed today.
Yeah, I guess
Oh, it's great to see. Sorry, just to interrupt. It's great to see Simon was on the live there. So
great.
glad you got your question answered.
I think for me, it's about get your feedback loops in place. I think that's one of the most important elements, and everything that we do as far as what we're developing should be to contribute to those feedback loops. So we're building, therefore we're building a feature. We're measuring. How are we going to measure the outcome of this? So are we going to, is it, I don't know how many users we acquire? Is it how many users complete the registration process? Make sure that you've got your measures in place and work through those different elements. And then always retrospectively looking at, well, what have I learned? So I've gone through all of this. I've gone through this build. I've gone through this measurements. These measurements tell me this, and what have I learned? It's really important you sort of work through and critically sort of analyze all of those elements in order to then go and establish how you're reaching your goal as a startup, working towards that goal. So it's a very traditional way of looking at it, but get your feedback loops in place. You build, measure, and learn, but don't be too structured in what you do, what you define as what build is, or what measure is, or what learn is. It doesn't mean you have to build an application. It could be that you're building conversations, you're building a social media group, or elements like that. It doesn't have to be those things. As long as it's then you can lead that to the measure, and then you can learn from those in order to establish where you're going with your startup. And navigating your product roadmap is what that should allow you to do. I think that's how I'd summarize it. I don't know whether that helps.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's nearly bang on half past. So I'm going to say that was a success. But yeah, thanks for everyone for watching today. I hope you enjoyed Mark's answers anyway. But if anyone's ever got any questions, just pop them in the group. There's our product managers in there, there's designers in there, there's marketing, there's finance, you name it. So if you've ever got any questions, just pop them in the group because that's monitored daily. So yeah, thanks for that today, Mark.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, well, and I hope everyone else found that of value anyway. But so next week we're going to be sitting with Paul Dodd, who's head of marketing. So we'll be doing the same thing. So drop any of your marketing questions when the posts come up in the group there. But yeah, as for today, product is done. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
See you later. Bye.